Hello to all of you joining us from around the US and the globe. It is 12 noon here in Eastern time zone of the United States, but whatever time it is for you locally, we welcome you and thank you for joining us. My name is Kimberly Menzel, and I am the host for the webinar today. Today's presentation is titled Data Governance and Compliance in the Ubiquitous Digital World by Dr. Diane Janosek. I will introduce Dr. Janosek in just a few moments. We welcome you to this Women in Cyber Leadership Series webinar. Here is today's agenda. We will have a word about our university, some housekeeping, an overview of the Center for Women in Cyber, which is sponsoring this series, and our presenter's bio and presentation. After the presentation, we will have a question and answer period and wrap up with information about upcoming webinars and how to obtain the recording, slides, and a certificate of completion. Many joining us today are quite familiar with Capital, but if you're joining us for the first time, here are some quick facts about the university. We are a nonprofit, private, accredited university based in Laurel, Maryland, USA, with a global faculty and student body. We were founded nearly 100 years ago in 1927. We have regional accreditation, the highest level of accreditation available in the United States, authorized from the state of Maryland, and specialized accreditation for many of our individual programs. Technology is literally our middle name. Our goal, our focus, and our mission is technology. This webinar is very much in keeping with our mission. We offer degrees and certificates in computer science, IT-related disciplines, and data science. Before we begin, I want to cover just a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions during the webcast, type them in the chat box and submit your question to the presenter. You can submit questions at any time, and we will try to answer as many of these as possible at the end of the presentation. All participants will see questions posted in the chat box. Number two, we are not enabling audience microphones or webcams for this webinar. So sorry, we're trying to keep the flow smooth. A follow-up email will be sent to all registrants with the on-demand link to the recording and slides. So stay tuned to the end to learn how to get a participation certificate. Apparently, I haven't had enough coffee this morning. And finally, the entire presentation, including the Q&A at the end, should take just about 60 minutes. So this fall series of webinar is offered by Capital and is part of the Center for Women in Cyber's Cyber Leadership Series. So what really does that mean? Capital Technology University Center for Women in Cyber, or CWC as we refer to it, is focused on empowering women of all ages to pursue careers in cyber. This center seeks to address the growing need for women professionals and leaders in cyber-related fields. The CWC provides the resources, direction, and positive support needed for success in achieving professional and educational goals through presentations, hands-on activities, partnerships, and mentoring. The CWC is passionate in its quest to develop the next generation of diverse cyber leaders. The CapTech Talk webinar today is called Data Governance and Compliance in the Ubiquitous Digital World, presented by Dr. Diane Janosek. So a little bit about Dr. Diana Janosek before I go on. Dr. Janosek has an illustrious career and could spend the entire webinar detailing many of her accomplishments. And I know that from a personal level, and she's wonderful, and she's been a wonderful mentor, friend, and leader for many years. She holds a doctorate, a JD, the CISSP, and the LPEC. She is an award-winning cyber leader, attorney, author, and speaker. She is a Defense Intelligence Senior Executive Service member and the National Security Agency's Deputy Chief of Compliance. She is the former commandant for the National Cryptological University and formal legal counsel for the White House and the Pentagon. She has been recognized with numerous awards, all very well deserved, including the Hall of Fame with the Information Systems Security Association International and several Women of the Year awards. In addition to her work with the U.S. government, she is, and I'm very proud and honored to say this, the director of Capital's Center for Women and Cyber. Without further ado, oh, I'm sorry, you know what? I did forget one of the most important things, so this is my bad. Dr. Janosek did earn her Ph.D. in cyber leadership from Capital and her Juris Doctorate from the Columbus School of Law at Catholic University of America. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Janosek to the Women in Cyber Leadership series. Thank you, Dr. Janosek, for being here and for giving your time, support, and effort to all the women who are pursuing cybersecurity. We greatly appreciate your time and your efforts and your support. So we welcome you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Spencer. Hello, everybody. It's December here. I'm in Maryland, where Capital Technology University is, and it's a beautiful day. And so I'm not sure where you're all calling from, but if you could see me in person, I had all of my holiday gear on since it's the holiday season here. And so I'm just excited to talk with you. This slide, they left this one slide up just to let you know. I had just come back from Saudi Arabia. It was a wonderful trip. It was in Riyadh. I was at Black Hat Middle East and Africa. It's the world's largest conference in cybersecurity, I believe, to date. There were 60,000 registrants. It was an amazing opportunity. And so I presented this while I was there, and I wanted to offer it up to the Capital Technology University community just to share a little bit about what I talked about. And so we can go to the next slide. So I'm not sure if all of you have been enrolled in a class at Capital Technology University or not. If you haven't, I would love for you to enroll in a course. As Kimberly said, I did get my PhD there in cyber leadership. It's a wonderful program for all genders. So I'm pleased I can help support the Center for Women in Cyber. So that's one of my passions. But we all have passions, and that's what I love about our community. So this presentation is data governance and compliance in a ubiquitous global digital world. What are we really talking about? Don't shoot an arrow in the dark. So what I was going to try to talk to you about today and just have a discussion is what does that really mean? Like data, okay, got it. So what, or what does that mean? Or is it a big deal? Or just how do you unpack it? We hear about it, but what does that really mean? So I'm going to try to present it today with 4 concepts: understanding data. She jumped the gun. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you for doing the slides too. So there's 4 parts of a successful, so we're going to leave it on this slide for a little while I give a little bit of a background. So I was going to present today in 4 very kind of simple areas to explain kind of breaking out what is data. And I'm going to explain these. So I want to emphasize the significance today and the importance of these concepts. I figured just using by breaking out as the acronym is DATA. D is for deliberate, stressing the importance of what data you have, understanding its origins, and the purpose behind its existence. A is for authenticated, and I have a slide for each of these, where we discuss the need to verify and defend the data's origins, ensuring transparency and accountability. Authenticity is really what it is. And then T for traceability, and that's really, I believe, the biggest challenge that we're going to have in 2024 and beyond. Explaining the necessity, we're going to talk about why we need to know where the data came from, tracing it back within the information systems, understanding its journey, understanding if it's been enriched, and its sensitivity properties. So traceability, T, is really the linchpin for a successful data governance program. Available is emphasizing the balance between data availability and controlled access, and ensuring it's accessible to only authorized individuals when needed. So I'll go through that in just a minute, but let me give you a little bit of a backdrop for a little bit. So we hear about cyber breaches all the time, don't we? We all, every day, it's like people ignore them after a while, right? So generally when you hear about a cyber breach, people that are involved, they want to know what happened, what data, how did they get access to the data, how critical was the data, how much harm, how much disclosure was it, who did it go to, how was it reported? Do we have to report it to the people that were impacted? Do we have to report it to overseers? Is it going to affect our business reputation? So it's all those different things. It's not just closing down the intrusion or stopping the ransomware, or stopping the insider threat. There's all these other elements that have to get layered on top of it that makes this arena much more complicated. So thank you for sharing this journey with me today as I go through it. I'm going to offer up two propositions that I hope you both will agree with. First proposition, and I'm going to get an analogy here. We all have heard that love is a universal language, right? It's a universal language. It's nonverbal, and people kind of understand that. They accept it. So my second proposition is data is a universal language. So what's the definition of language? So I'm calling it a universal language. What's the actual definition of language? Language is a nonverbal method of expression or communication. It's a means or mechanism to express a communication in different ways. So for example, an emoji. You're expressing an emotion with an emoji, right? Is an emoji a data source? How is that going to be handled? So in today's world, the SEC now is looking at whether or not they have to start thinking of emojis when they do their reviews. For example, if there was someone heard it got an emoji, that meant something, and it meant dump a bunch of stock before something goes down to, insider information in order to protect, preserve their assets. So somebody sold a bunch of their shares. That little emoji may have meant something. It was a form of communication. We heard recently a high-profile litigation about non-digital records where someone found out a really ripped up piece of paper, and the prosecution found it and they taped it all back together again. And it was, you think of that, well, that's, sure, that's a record. That's part of the data sources that are out there. So records matter, and data is records, and data can live on. The same way the little piece of paper was found and they taped it all together to use it in a court case, the same way that data can live on. So data really does matter. So, and if you think about it, without data, you don't need we didn't have something to protect. Wouldn't have to worry about firewalls and intrusion detection and ransomware prevention and storage and encrypting transmissions and being good data stewards. And you wouldn't even have AI. So all of these are the envelope around the data. So I want to just break down what is data. And then the last thing I want to end on, and I'll say my conclusion now, and I'll wrap it back up with this, is I really believe as we go through this, there is an ongoing merger coming together right now in front of our eyes between the field of information security and the field of data governance. They've never really been talked about in that way, but I just see they're truly colliding in a way that's probably positive. And so I believe that merger or collision between information security and data governance is imminent. And I'll tell you about this, I'll tell you why. Okay. So before we go into, and we can go, actually, let's go to the next slide for data. Great. So your data governance plan must have 4 of these elements. Must be deliberate, authenticated, traceable, and available. And I'm going to explain each one of those in just a minute. But I did find this article, and I thought, this is actually pretty valuable because my guess is it's a lot more than what this reports out, more than we probably people are willing to admit. 4 out of 10 enterprise IT decision makers admitted to wasting up to $100,000 per year keeping useless hardware that contains sensitive information rather than sanitizing the data and the device. So it's easier just to hold on to something, right? Well, I can only work for so long, in this data-driven world that we have, and the more and more we get, it's just going to be compounded. Holding on to data longer than you have to, and then just compounds the problem. So how to break that down. So I thought that was an interesting source, and you'll see that on my last slide with the reference sources for that one. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so talking about, I apologize, I have a little tickle in my throat here. I use this picture since I was doing this in Saudi Arabia. So I wanted something from the Middle East. This was a Ferris wheel. So you have to be very deliberate, right? And when you get on a Ferris wheel, when you get off it, you have to, otherwise you'd literally be going on in circles. So being deliberate, that was a good, visual for being that. So let's think about this with data. You have to start something very small, and you add on and add on and add on, and then all of a sudden you have a data governance program. What does it start with, and why is thinking of it being very deliberate matters? I was trying to do an analogy, and as I mentioned, I think that the language of love, and love is a I guess get this straight here because I always get myself mixed up. Data is a universal language, and I mentioned that. So I like to think of it in things that we already know. So talking about data, I was thinking about making the analogy to a human body and why every little piece matters. That one little emoji, that ripped up little piece of paper, why does that matter? The analogy that I came with was if you think about it as a human body, our physical body, if you start out really small, things that are small, cells and tissues and neurons, what is the smallest bone in the human body? So we obviously need our bone structure, right? The smallest bone is the stapes, S-T-A-P-E-S. Folks probably know what that is, but just in case, it is the smallest bone in the human body. And any damage to this bone can cause partial or complete hearing loss. It's the smallest bone in the human body. And can you imagine it causes that much? You would lose one of your senses. So this little bone, what it helps with is that before being recognized by the brain, sound waves must enter the auditory canal, go through the tympanic membrane, the eardrum, and then enter the middle ear compartment. So a little tiny piece matters. That's why I was trying to draw the analogy back to a little emoji and these little things. And so how do they start, creeping up on you? So what kind of data would you actually have, and being deliberate and knowing what you have? You got to start looking through it. What, as a business entity, you have to understand your data assets, what information you have in a customer relationship management database, for example. Do you have business critical documents, strategic plans, agreements, all those different third-party documents and things that you have for as part of your operational systems? You also need to worry about maintaining documents or information that's subject to regulation or for review, right? If you have somebody coming in to double check if something did happen, or you have to produce something. You have intellectual property, product designs, technical specifications. You would have personnel information, employee details. So trying to understand what data you have, you got to be deliberate in identifying what's in your stores. What do you anticipate getting being part of that, and along that way. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. So not all data is created equal, right? There's different values with different data sources depending upon what type of data it is. They don't all have the same value, so they won't all have the same permissions. So, so you have to be able to authenticate the data and knowing where it comes from. So never before in the history of the world have we had this scope of this data challenge. Knowing what you have and then ensuring where you got it from. If let's say you have customer information. Do you have customer information because it was by consent? Do you have customer information because you purchased it from one of your partners? Did you get it just from open source information or, gleaning information from different things? Why do you have it? How much private information is there? How sensitive is it if someone got a hold of it? How much harm would it cause to your company if it was going to be released, if people didn't think that they could do business with you without having their information being shared broadly? So working that through and authenticating where you got it from, why you have it, and how long you should have it for. The authentication is really important because what happens now, as you know, with this AI world, is they consolidate it all. They do these searches and they create new reporting and new documents based upon multiple data sources. And so that data becomes enriched. What is that new data source then? What are you going to call that? How are you going to treat it? Where are you going to store it? Who's going to get access to it? So let's go to the next slide. The data governance plan must be deliberate, so plan it, authenticate it, understand what the data is, and traceable. Traceability is going to be the biggest challenge we have, I believe, in this ubiquitous world, this data-enriched world that we live in. Being able to trace where things come from, who stores it, why it's being stored. And so I'm sure that people have heard about this, but just in case, have people heard about versioning? Versioning in the cloud. So many things now are in the cloud. So we all have different versions of different documents, but different versions of data and data objects. That is now occurring. So if you think about it, useful data management tool is using versioning, right? We did this version here. We had changed permissions for this person for this thing. This different data object has this type of classifications on it in terms of identifying where it came from. Versioning is considered a best practice when you're storing and retrieving data from the cloud. And everyone's using the cloud these days, right? So the value of the cloud is that it can preserve and retrieve different object versions, right? Of course, you're going to have different object versions in the case of modifications, case of redundancy. You want to have, kind of what change was made, why it was made. But when you create that redundancy and the resiliency that we have to have, you create shadow data. And so when you create shadow data, it increases the opportunity of the risk of misuse because you may not know where all that shadow data is. You may forget that you even had it. You may have gone back to that first slide that I mentioned, and 4 out of 10 would rather just pay to keep stuff that they don't really know what to do with rather than just getting rid of it. It's just easier, but in the long end, it's actually going to be harder. So creating the shadow data, different versioning, actually creates increased risk of misuse. That's pretty, that's a pretty big risk, isn't it? Especially considering if it was your crown jewels or intellectual property, just your software designs, a lot of different things, and can cause increased risk of misuse. So you unmanaged data and backups inevitably occur, right? Of course. And they often are unintentional. Sometimes your system doesn't work, it just shuts down, and then you pull it up and you don't realize that there's another backup that was out there and it's still discoverable, but maybe you don't know about it. So we know about the AWS buckets, the Azure Blob containers, and the Google Cloud. They're all very, very helpful. They're helpful for many things. But you have to remember each version costs money. So the traceability aspect of your program, if you get it right, it can help you reduce costs by having less versions and only maintain the versions that you really do. So versioning in the cloud, which we are familiar with, creates a shadow data, and then they can have multiple versions of an object in the same bucket. And previous versions may stay on indefinitely. So let me just say that again. Versioning in the cloud can create shadow data. And that means you could have multiple versions of an object in the same bucket. You can imagine this gets more and more complicated. So the caution is that each previous version of an object can, in certain cases, inherit the permissions of the original file. Let me say that again. Each previous version of an object can, in certain cases, inherit the permissions of the original file. So let's say the person that created it, without the restrictions on it. All of a sudden, not realizing it, it's unrestricted. And the next versions, you lock it down because now that you're done, you've figured it out, you locked it down before you but then it still exists. And it's still accessible, just unknown. So that's where the challenge comes. There's been some good articles out by Laminar Labs, Laminar Labs, talking about versioning in the AWS S3 buckets, the Azure Blob containers, and the Google Cloud buckets. So there's a good article that talks about that. I believe I also have it on the reference chart as well on the references, but it is helpful just to read it from a pure IT perspective if you want to read more about that. So I wanted to mention that part about creating the shadow data in the versioning. It's a different concept that not everybody thinks about because, of course, you want to maintain and create resiliency. But if you don't know where it is, where it went, who actually will get access to it, it's going to be hard to delete it and get rid of it when you should no longer be maintaining it. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Available. Okay, so you definitely want your data to be available, and you want your data to be not available to individuals that you don't want to give access to, right? So it's pretty important in terms of identifying availability or non-availability. I wanted to mention that what type of data are we talking about? That we want to have available to the individuals, the people that have a need to know, or it's within their job description, have access to it, or it's a partner that you want to partner with, but you only want to have them access to certain information. What type of data would you want to have available or maybe not available? So procurement, you have procurement, you do different, you partner with other individuals, you buy things from them, or they buy things from you. You could have contractor social security numbers. You could have vendor contracts. You could have your own employees' information. You have accounts payable, contractor invoices, vendor invoices, employee expense reimbursements, 1099s, vendor social security numbers, if they're sole proprietors. You have to also remember that there's health and safety, there's accident reports, medical, industrial hygiene data. And that's really important if something does happen, if you do have some type of issue, or even a tragedy at your facility, those health and safety records become very, very important. You want to be careful of your HR data. Maybe a lot of people do outsourcing with HR, and they may be using the cloud. They may have different versioning and not be aware of it. And who's reliable or responsible for maintaining that or ensuring the restricted access to it. Your HR data could include employee data, payroll, W-2s, background checks. Then you also have, that's the other area that's very highly regulated, is the treasury with all the different bank accounts and how those get treasury and banking is highly regulated. Records management. You got to have within your records management, where are all your policies and procedures on handling the information? So you need to know where your information is. Then you also need to have a plan of how you're going to deal with that information. So a record keeping plan is very important. And if you don't have one, then you can also get in trouble down the road if something happens and you don't have proper procedures in place. You might have personal confidential information or privileged data if you have an in-house counsel or you sort guidance from an attorney. So the legal considerations are important. Let's say you sought legal counsel because you had a security incident or a cybersecurity incident or significant personnel incident. All of that type of data is relevant. Your shareholder data, if you're a public company. You also have to remember about your industrial control, supervisory control, and data acquisition. And the biggest challenge in terms of all these different areas is your outsourcing. Who do you outsource to? And who do you give information to, let's say, just for your payroll? It's very basic, right? But where does that information go and how are they maintaining it? And are you liable should something happen to that? So I thought that was kind of an interesting perspective. I guess we can go to, I'm hoping this is helpful for folks just to kind of talk it through. Okay, there's those references. Let's see if I had that. Okay, let's go back to the, if we could just go back to the slide with the 4, if you don't mind, the data slide. Yep, perfect. Great. If you could leave it on that for a little while, that'd be great. Okay, so what we've learned today is that not all data is created equal. Not all data has the same value. Not all data needs the same level of protection. And how you share the data and how you enrich the data is important. And how you have to know that why you're doing all of that. So data is currency, right? If you, data is really the most important currency almost in this world that we live in today. In 2020, the internet hit 64 zettabytes. That was in 2020. I have to look at the statistic for where it is today. So 64 zettabytes is pretty phenomenal in terms of how much information is out there. That's just information, not just the data objects as part of the information. So the other thing I wanted to mention is a lot of the times people don't think about it, but I know information security professionals know this. If you don't pay for something and you get something, you are the product. That means data about you is being sold. So you don't pay for something, you are the product. Data about you is being sold. People have that's hard sometimes for people to think about, like, oh, I get it for free. Well, actually, no. You're giving it to them for free. So your currency is your data. That's just as valuable as $1. So that's an interesting concept that we should probably start trying to teach our young kids today in the world about that coming through up into this world that they've inherited from the rest of us, that who you are and your information about you is currency, and it does matter. So why am I mentioning all of this? If you heard from Miss Menzel at the beginning that, I have a law degree, and then the Ph.D. and my certifications there is information security, and then the LPEC is actually legal professional in ethics and compliance by ECI. So the ethics and compliance, the LPEC certification is interesting. It really teaches you to think like, why do we have a compliance? How does ethics tie into it? And is there an ethical component to our data governance programs? There's absolutely an ethical component to data governance programs. A lot of challenges people get in trouble for is insider knowledge and insider trading. That's where the ethics really comes into play. What information did they have available to them? What could they see from the data that made them possibly go an insider threat, and then really have a disservice to the company that they work for, or a disservice if they were a board of directors on a board, or if they were in the leadership of a particular company. So ethics and compliance are very much intertwined in these conversations. So ethics and compliance risk areas. And so I thought I might just mention a little bit about that. So far, we've talked about having a program, why we need a program. If you're going to have a program, what do you have to ensure that you do? You got to be deliberate. You got to know, authenticate it, know what actual data it is, what you have it, be able to trace it back, make sure it's only available to the right people, be careful of versioning. And then what if this goes wrong? Like, let's say some element we forget or skip or something. What risk could that possibly bring to you or your company or your agency or your nonprofit? What risk is there? As we know, ethics considerations and whether or not someone has integrity or trust is really the most important thing a company can have. And they call that in the legal world of law cases, they call it the goodwill of a company. What's the goodwill? And they put goodwill as a tangible. They actually have, in many cases, they say the goodwill of that company and part of a sale of a company is this much. It's the value that is known to the community for that particular entity. So goodwill ties directly to, it's a non-tangible, but it has an economic value, which is kind of an interesting concept. So what happens if you don't have a decent data governance program that's managed and effectively with proper oversight? You definitely could have conflict of interest problems, right? You could have, if you're, working with different competitors, you could have knowledge of what different competitors are. If you're in the middle and you have that, if you use that to your advantage. you have a conflict of interest. You have to remember that you have to have, there's antitrust and competition laws. So let's say you want to merge with another organization, or you're going to force somebody out of the market. There's antitrust and competition there. You could be pulled in for a review by the federal regulators or the state regulators to say, what are you doing and why are you doing it? We've seen that a lot with some of the major IT companies out there, even the cloud service providers. We've seen that with Apple, with some of the products that they have in terms of, are they, promoting fair competition in the marketplace, or are they freezing people out? So that's a real issue in terms of ethics and compliance issues with data. Your data could also show if there's bribery and corruption. Could show, as I mentioned, just a little thing about the emoji. There's bribery and corruption, trying to say, hey, this is coming. You have 2 sets of books. We've heard about that from a long, long time ago with the mafia when they had 2 sets of books. That really does exist, but now it's much more complicated because there's so many different areas of records that people could get access to in different places. And so it just makes it so much more complicated. So if you don't engage in bribery and corruption, you don't have to worry about it. The challenge, of course, is that these organizations are very, very large. They've done a lot of studies these days in terms of people lying and stealing from the workplace. It's gotten real. And so there could be bribery and corruption going on right in your own organization, even if the leadership is committed to a solid program. So it could undermine your company unwittingly, but it could still cause direct harm to your organization. Your record, if your data and how it comes together could show a pattern of discrimination or harassment. You could have product safety issues depending upon the different versions that you have. We saw that recently with the SEC filing that was filed for the SolarWinds incident that happened, and the CISO that was there, and talking about product safety. They said there was different emails back, different emails that were in that had been sent saying, hey, we're concerned, this could be vulnerable, this could create a cybersecurity risk. So product safety, the records could indicate that there's product safety concerns in the past. That could definitely draw some immediate risk areas. Environmental issues along the lines of DEIA, could be issues there. Privacy and data protection, social media, things that could be posted on social media or impacted that. So there's a whole bunch of different areas that this data program could impact a company in risk areas that they may not be thinking about. So let's say, another area that I want to mention is, so let's just think, okay, got some risk. I got to remember that there's risk out there. There's bad things that could happen to me. So I got to try to do the things right. Okay, so trying to do things right. Once we know where the data is, and so you do it all right. And you're like, you know what, it's better to work with another vendor in this area of our business so I can focus on the primary mission of our company. So you decide to do outsourcing of certain things. What are your outsourcing considerations that you have to think about to minimize risk in this data world that we live in, this ubiquitous digital world, and I'm calling it? Before you outsource, you got to think about what laws of the states or the countries are you outsourcing in. There's obviously the European rules apply if you're working in the European area. There's the EU-US data privacy framework. There's the European Commission's got a number of things that they want to enforce in that area. So you have to think about what states and what countries you're outsourcing in. California, for example, started off with a pretty significant data privacy rule before a lot of the other states did. New York was one of the first ones as well because of the financial sectors there. So the states matter as well as the countries matter to where you're outsourcing to. You got to take a look at your contracts. You got to look at the contract language and how they're going to handle the data, who's responsible for it, and how they're going to commit to handling that data. Does the contract language include protection from enforcement actions? Is it a non-delegable duty? Can you say, hey, you must take care of this? Well, what if you really can't pass it off to somebody else? It's your responsibility as a company. So you got to be careful as to who you ask to handle certain items for you. Your contract language. What about protection from indemnification, from civil or private actions? What about the right to audit? If you do outsourcing, do you have a right to audit them? What right do they have to access to your information? If a breach happens, what legal recourse do you have? What's the reputational risk of outsourcing and breaching by contractors? So Ms. Menzel, who you met in the beginning of today's lecture, she's with the Maryland State Department of Commerce. So in the Department of Commerce, right, that is the backbone of who we are as a nation. Here in Maryland, commerce is very important. Growing our business industry, ensuring our industry is secure with proper technology, as well as the proper controls, as well as the professionals that are trained and certified to handle things. The commerce is what made the United States of America, right? I mean, we are a capitalist country. Our United States Constitution provides for free and fair competition, and so you need commerce, in the United States. So the Commerce Clause, is really important to who we are as Americans and why we have the highest income in the world in terms of our nation's collectively across the world in terms of the United States amount that we make per year. So commerce is that important. So you have to remember these outsourcing considerations. A lot of times when in commerce, you partner. When you partner, opening up partnering can cause risk. So you got to think about what the risk aperture is. How can you manage that risk aperture? So it does get a little bit complicated. It's not scary. It's just that you have to just start thinking of it through kind of what type of data, what type of risk could provide, what levels of investment are needed to protect it. So don't let risky data be your house of cards, right? Don't let your data be your house of cards. You don't want it to all just collapse because there's actually nothing in the background. So data can get you in trouble, but that's okay because, everyone that's on this call is passionate about evaluating the data that ensuring that it's trustworthy, timely, and actionable, remembering versioning, and just ask the questions. If it's, if you're going to partner with somebody, ask the questions. How do you handle this? Have you handled it in the past? Have you had breaches in the past? What type of employee access is there? Do you have had issues with insider threat? How long do you store information? Do you enrich it? Do you share it? Do you then sell my data to somebody else? Asking all of those questions are very, very valid, and it's proper due diligence. So, and then also now under these new rules in both the US and the EU, we got to ensure that all data is fairly and lawfully processed with the consent of the individual. So a lot more obligations are being imposed upon companies now. So it's just good to know. So that's what I meant by data in a ubiquitous world. So with that, I think I'm supposed to turn it back to Ms. Menzel. At this point, it's at 12:45. And I believe I turn it back to you.
Thank
You
you.
can put up my contact information, I guess, if there's one there. Oh, there's, yeah. Oh, okay, there we go. Thank you. There's my contact information. If you want to get a hold of me, I'm departing the federal service, just if you have questions, or you can contact me at Capital Tech as well. Capital Tech, you can go to the next slide. My Capital Tech, I also have a Capital Tech email as well that I should have put up there instead of that one. But over to you, Ms. Menzel.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Janosek, or Dr. Janosek. I'm sorry. I'm so glad that you have your doctorate degree. Of course, now I just have to remember that. Not that you weren't already well decorated in a number of things that you completely deserve. At this point, I'd like to thank Dr. Janosek for sharing her thoughts with us. She is absolutely amazing. And so I can't say that enough in that particular case. What I would like to do is look at some questions that we have here. We're going to look at what has come in through the chat box during the presentation, or you can type in your question now if you'd like. We can take questions in the order that they go in and answer as many of them as possible in the next few minutes. So let's go ahead and take a look at that as well. Let's see, do we have them coming up? Let's see. I believe that Mr. Drayton is working with us on our chat box. Let's see, do we have anything going on right now, Mr. Drayton? I don't see anything quite yet, but I'm sure there will be a ton of questions.
So let me
Dr.
give me let if we could maybe put in the chat box. I can't see the chat box where I am, but let me give people my Capital Technology University email.
Sure.
It's D for Diane, M for Mary, Janosek, Janosek. So DM Janosek at CapTechU,
Right.
CAPTECHU.edu. So DM Janosek at CAPTECHU.edu.
Excellent.
So if people are going through their educational journey and have questions about what opportunities are out there, if I can help you, I always like to make myself available for that. Email me and I can connect with you. And I hope that, as we go forward in 2024, I love the fact that Capital Technology has these sessions because it's so fascinating to hear about so many different things. We've had, as you can see, she's got other ones. We just finished. This is the fourth one this year, right, Kim, this fall?
Yes, ma'am.
And
Yes,
then we've
ma'am.
got some more coming up. So they are really dedicated to this. Capital Technology University is really dedicated to helping people learn and just explore so many things that are changing. And just, it's so quick, this amount of change. It's never static. So in this world that we live in, this continuous learning is just so important. So I really credit, Capital Technology University for, doing these sessions. So anyway, so you'll have my email there. So if people have questions afterwards or have ideas, they can definitely email me.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Dr. Janosek, I did put your email in the chat because I want to make sure they could physically see that as well. Although I don't see anything quite in chat yet. I'm not
Okay.
sure if anybody's having problems. Can we just make sure, Mr. Drayton, that the chat is activated and everybody is able to type stuff in? But while we're doing that, I just want to reiterate what Dr. Janosek said. Today is the final webinar of the Women in Leadership series, but we do have more continuing the new year. And of course, you can see them on the screen as well. On January 18th, we have Dr. Dana Brooks, and she's presenting cyber threat intelligence driven phishing awareness programs. And on February 15th, we have Dr. Daryl Burrell, and he's presenting Find Your Scholarly Voice using peer-reviewed publications to showcase your expertise. So they are extremely interesting coming up, and they're what CWC is hoping to present, or that we're presenting in the next couple months. Let's see, what else do we have on? I would like to go ahead to the next slide if possible, Mr. Drayton. We can
I
take
wanted to mention, Ms.
Oh,
Bensel, that Dr. Danae Brooks is
yeah.
also a graduate of Capital Technology University. I think, as well as the gentleman is also, I think he's got multiple degrees, but he's also, I believe, a graduate of Capital Technology University. So lots of experts have come through the halls of Capital Tech for sure.
I was thinking the same thing, the hallowed halls of
Yeah.
Capital Technology University. And I mean, as you can see, and I hope our audience can see about the quality of people that we have coming through. I mean, Dr. Janosek is one of our highest quality. And of course, we're always thrilled to have her. But as she points out, we do have other esteemed individuals that have gone through these halls as well. So having said that, I do want to talk about that you are able to register for these as well. So if you'd like to learn more or register for these particular seminars, even though you're here for this one, it is www.captech.edu/webinar-series. Now, if we go to the next slide, Mr. Drayton, that'd be fabulous, please.
I also wanted to sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to also let you know that the chat is open. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to put those in the chat. I apologize, Kim.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Drayton. We definitely appreciate that. As always, we work through things, but that's what we do. We just keep going, right? But in relation to what Dr. Janosek had said, I just want to mention that Capital offers degrees and certificates related to this topic. We'd like you to join us for master's and doctoral virtual information sessions. They're held monthly. You can email or call, and we will register you for this information session. Of course, on the slide, you can see the email and you can see the phone number as well. We'd love to hear from you. And you can catch up and see if this is something you would like to do. Let's see. Oh, you know what? We do have a thank you, Dr. Janosek,
Oh, thank you.
for all that you do, and I have to completely agree with this individual.
Well,
Um,
yeah.
we,
Well, thank you, everyone. I think this is the last slide. Is that correct?
actually, no, we have a little bit
Another,
more.
okay,
Mr.
keep
Drayton,
going. Okay. Just
go
want
to
to
the
say
next.
thank you. Thanks to everyone calling in because people are busy. This is a really busy time of year for everybody. So thanks for
Oh,
calling in, the folks that were able to call in.
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Drayton, can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, thank you so much. And I think this is something that maybe our participants are interested in. Uh, Once again, we're thanking our presenter, but as I mentioned before the presentation, we have a link to the recording and slides, and they will be emailed to all participants. So what Dr. Janosek has obviously imparted upon all of you, you can go back and listen to and read through, and you'll have all the information. We also offer, upon request, of course, is a certificate of completion. So please reply to the email. We will send out with the recording link, and then you can go ahead and you can get a certificate. We greatly appreciate your time. And I think if we go to the next slide, Mr. Drayton, I think that'll be our final one. Unless we have any questions.
I just wanted to end on, thanks to the state of Maryland for doing what they're doing and having you in the role that you're in, Ms. Menzel. Maryland is a very strong cybersecurity state. A lot of activity at the academic, government, and private sector. Really an amazing collaboration. So that's directly goes to what you're doing in the Department of Commerce. So kudos to you and, for everyone helping make this Maryland such a strong state. It's just really amazing. And the amount of passion it has for, developing a cybersecurity industry to help all of our defense industrial base, support the national government, as well as making the private sector stronger across all critical infrastructure sectors. So thank you for that. And thank you everyone for joining us, and hope everyone has a great holiday and a new year. And I'll let you have the final word, Ms. Menzel.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Janosek, and I do appreciate those kudos. It's nice to hear, and I must say that I appreciate the support from Capital Technology University, and I'm very excited and very proud to support them on behalf of Commerce in the state of Maryland and myself. We are very excited to be here and to always be part of the cyber community and work hard to continue moving forward towards success. Since our webinar is concluded at this point, once again, I'm Kimberly Menzel on behalf of Capital Technology saying thank you very much. Have a wonderful holiday and have a very nice rest of your week. Thank you so much. Our webinar is now concluded.